in and out of school, and how we can make connections between those two things. Finally, we're really excited to have a case study from a school that you'll definitely all enjoy. And finally, we'll introduce a resource that we've created collaboratively too, that you'll be able to download at the end of this session. Just before we crack on into the main content, if any of you have any questions, there isn't masses of time for Q&A at the end of this session, but if any of you do have any burning questions, if you could pop them into the chat for us. If somebody else also likes the look of that question, if you could give it a like, and then we've got people keeping an eye on that. If we don't have time to get to them within the hour's session, we'll make sure that we email around the set of responses. And finally, if you've got colleagues who are interested in the webinar but haven't been able to attend or not been able to sign up, or you want to share it on, hopefully within the next 24 to 48 hours, the recording of this will be on our YouTube channel, and we'll alert attendees to when that goes live. So you'll be able to share that as well. Okay, let's get cracking. So reading for pleasure, what do we mean? We talk about reading for pleasure in all kinds of ways. We say it a lot, but just to get us grounded in what we're actually thinking about here. So World Book Day's definition, similar to lots of others, but is feeling a sense of satisfaction or pleasure by engaging with chosen reading material in their free time. And we've been talking to some children as part of a consultancy project we've been doing with a group of schools. And we started talking to them about what they considered a hobby to be, and their responses to that felt like the way that we might want them to start talking about reading. So they talked about a hobby being fun, something that they choose to do regularly, maybe even every day, that they're not told to do, that they recognise can be fun even if they aren't good at it, or even if they find it difficult. They understand that they might get better at it if they do it more often. And it might include a degree of aspiration, but it doesn't have to. So they might see where their hobby can lead them personally or professionally, or they might just enjoy doing it and not see a journey for it. And I've included my favourite picture that one of the children in our project drew when I asked them to describe how they felt about reading. So he liked it. He liked being able to choose books. He was less keen on filling in his reading record. In fact, to the extent that he started telling his teacher he didn't read at all, because that meant he didn't have to write it down. So that's just something for us to kind of reflect on as we start this session this afternoon. Alongside the colleagues that I'm sat with today, we've developed a series of 6 reading behaviours that lead to children reading for pleasure, and that's from the research base around reading for pleasure. So these are simplified, of course. On the left hand, on the blue lines, you can see the kind of adult-facing version, so being read to regularly, having books at home and school, having a choice in what you read, finding time to read, having trusted help to find a book, and making reading fun. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean like an enormous party. That's the sort of social aspect of reading. On the other side of the slide, you can see the poster that will be heading into primary schools very shortly as part of your World Book Day pack, which is the child-facing version of exactly the same thing. I'm going to pass on now, I believe. Oh, no, just before I pass on, apologies. We're just going to think about where this webinar came from just very quickly. So we've been working in, we work with lots of schools through as World Book Day, and over again, people are talking about how World Book Day can be used in terms of engaging with families and some of the challenges around doing that. And in terms of the key areas that have come out of both our kind of national survey and the focus piece of work that we've been doing, these are the key areas that we've noticed. So children missing reading aloud time both at home and at school, engagement with parents, both because of time or their potential attitude issues, and also skills as well. Children struggling with choosing a book and a lack of time to support individual choice. And the children in the project that we've been doing, it was very, very apparent that those children were looking at reading every time they went into a library. They felt like they were starting again, whereas the children who are more confident readers were able to go directly to an area of the library where they knew they'd find something that they liked. The fact that book ownership is decreasing, and the difficult job that we're all doing, which is trying to teach children how to read and to want to at the same time, which is the difficult balance we're all facing. But our ambition is to engage children with the wider reading ecology. So you can see that on the other side of the slide, so that they can see reading as being part of their whole lives rather than just something that happens at school. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass over to Debbie Thomas from the Open University, who's going to start us thinking about what a reading life might look like.
Thank you, Kate. We're going to think about our reading lives and think about how we do that through a 24-hour read, which is a pretty simple concept that comes from the original Teachers as Readers research, and the idea being that children record everything that they read in the last 24 hours. And you can see on the slide that could take lots of different forms. The children here have chosen to make collages, cutting and sticking different items to represent what they've been reading. And of course, that doesn't just mean we can do this with children, we can do this with other staff, but we can also do this with parents as a way of finding out about the breadth and range of reading that's going on at home as well as in school. Let's have a look at a couple of examples of some 24-hour reads. So Jamie from CLPE's got an example of his here. Jamie, tell us a bit about yours.
Yes, thank you, Debbie. So this is a typical 24-hour read for me. This was a Sunday back before Christmas, in fact. There's a mixture of different types of reading. A different wide range of reading, both for me for pleasure, but also for work-related reading. So this is the text I was reading for work, and a little bit of research I was doing around spelling, and then looking at other wider uses of reading. So reading my emails, but also scrolling on social media, so Twitter and Instagram. And then also looking at reading for pleasure with my family. So this was the book that I read to my children on that particular day. Also some wider reading around looking into my local sort of community magazine, the church service for that particular day, and then thinking about what I'm going to watch on television. So reading the TV listings, what I'm going to cook Sunday, Yorkshire puddings, and then how I sort of wind down the evening, checking up on the news, both for wider news, but also looking at the sport as well, seeing the scores.
Thanks, Jamie. So you can see just by listing what was read on a particular day, we're seeing a wide range of different reading for purposes, lots of different purposes. So Kate's also put together an example of her 24-hour read. You can see in the video here, Kate.
Great. So mine's a bit different. It was a holiday day, and I chose only to select the things that I did for pleasure, both on my own and with my son. So I'll try and share this film now, except the cursor is my.
Thanks, Kate. So again, a wide range of different sorts of reading as well, and reading with your children. And on the left-hand side here, Kate's just going to play my reading 24 hours, which mine did include work as well. So this was on a work day. And you see I've got a range of different things. And Kate and I both chose to do as on TikTok, which of course you wouldn't be doing with primary age children, but parents might choose to engage with as a way of representing their 24-hour read. And you can see just from the three that we've shared, quite a wide range of different sorts of reading: fiction, non-fiction, reading for different purposes. So a 24-hour read is a really great way of us being able to find out about the secret lives of our readers. We can find out what they're reading at home, and also what they're sharing in terms of reading materials at school. And it's also about recognising the breadth of different sorts of reading that goes on, which contributes to our understanding of ourselves as readers and really develops that reader identity. So just pause for a moment and think about what you've read in the last 24 hours, or what might your class have read, and just see if you can maybe scribble a couple of things down, or you might want to drop something in the chat. I wonder if you've got anything unusual that's been read in the last 24 hours. I'll just pause for a moment and let you think about your last 24-hour reads. We're all very quiet today, are we? Okay, well, I'm going to hand over now to Teresa Kremen from the Open University to consider the research around reading at home. Teresa.
Thank you, Debbie. Lovely to be here. So can we move the slide on? Yeah, thank you. Sorry. So I think thinking about the research that's available to us to read, to learn from, and to make connections to, we have to kind of really consider what our goal is and what do we know about the children's reading practices within the home, beyond perhaps a practice like 24-hour reads, and begin to question for ourselves what kind of assumptions or potential stereotypes or perceptions frame our understanding of our young people's reading at home. What kind of baggage do we bring when we think about their reading? Can we question that? Can we be open to what they're genuinely reading rather than what we perceive they ought to be reading? In our project, Researching Literacy Lives, the teachers went into children's homes in what we called learner visits, where they went to learn from the parents and to observe, to listen, to learn, rather than to tell. Not to tell about Nathan or Ishmael, but to listen, to watch. And as ethnographers, arguably, they found out a lot and came back rather shocked that their assumptions were challenged. And so I think it's really important to begin to explore a two-way understanding of reading practices in the home, not an assumption that we would like the parents to be doing X, Y, Z, but that we listen to what the parents are actually engaged in. Thank you. And of course, it's a really complex picture what research can share with us, but the OECD are clear. Parents are important role models. There's arguably no surprise in that for any of us. But parental education, the number of books in the home, the extent to which parents really enjoy reading and find it a pleasure for them alongside their youngsters will make a difference to those young people's reading achievement. Shared reading in the home has been very extensively researched. Indeed, there are hundreds of research projects that have looked at the significant impact that shared reading makes on language and literacy skills and on relationships of parent to child, which of course breed other kinds of understandings. But what's really important to hold on to is that longitudinal research shows there's a relative stability in parents' perceptions and children's interest in reading. So what we do as educators early on makes an enormous difference because it's probably not going to change. So we need to get involved really early to support, to listen, to learn, and to build on the practices in the home. And one way, of course, is through promoting shared reading. And in Rachel Levy and Jenny Priest's work, which was underscored by some work in Norway by Natalia Kursakova and Grover, they asked three questions really. What form does shared reading take in the 20 homes they visited, where they did extensive interviews with the parents and drew on an economic and culturally mixed sample? What form did shared reading take? Well, perhaps you're not surprised to learn it varied. It varied enormously from some parents who saw shared reading as an opportunity to teach the child specific aspects of reading or specific elements of the world or about her or his behaviour. Other parents saw shared reading as a moment for us, for laughter, for engagement. Others saw and indeed framed their parental enjoyment, as it were, around the whole notion of seeing reading as proficiency. And where they saw it as proficiency, it framed the way they participated. It framed their enjoyment, because I'm going to enjoy this if you're going to succeed at the skills I want you to have, because reading is a skill. And so when the child pointed out a key word that mummy had read or repeated and could, put their finger on that particular word, then mummy or daddy felt very pleased with the encounter. And the positive feedback was about developing that learning or developing understanding about the wider world or developing enjoyment. So, of course, what the key difference here is, how do parents perceive reading? Are they reading for pleasure and with pleasure, or are they reading in order to instruct? Understanding that is important, and sharing with parents what the purpose of reading for pleasure and the value of that pleasure is highly significant too. Some of the barriers that the parents found were when children didn't settle, for example. They moved around and grabbed other toys or resources in the room. They didn't settle to listen to the story that was being shared. And then parents had negative feedback, as it were, and thought, well, there's no point in this. He's not interested yet. I'll leave it. And in leaving it, and then trying again and perhaps experiencing the same and leaving it, sadly, things didn't move further forward positively. But we also know that there are some challenges with regard to reading aloud at home too. We've seen that reading declines as children grow older. So thanks, Jamie, for making that right. So the Farshaw-Nielsen data with 2,000 parents just a year ago in the November 2020, this is the 2021 report, shows that over the years, parental reading at home is declining. And Margaret Merger, whose work is in Australia, describes this as an orphan responsibility. Because if parents do see reading as proficiency, once the child has learnt to do it, then that negates the need to continue to read aloud. He can now read to himself, so why would I bother? And we can understand that. We can understand that. We need to actually share with parents the value of this practice that actually supports that, motivates that young person and supports their desire to continue to read. Young readers need support, and reading aloud and the dialogue around that and the choices that they might make are highly significant. It's worth noting too that we don't have much data on children reading to other children in the home, sibling reading. We have a little data from Eve Gregory's work on grandparents. But this is an area for more research, I think, as is the area of book access, which we're turning to next. So this work, Newman and Molan from the States, shows rather depressingly, really, that there's such a degree of unequal access to text locally that in areas of high poverty, of concentrated poverty, these researchers call them book deserts. Places where young people cannot get access to books or indeed print, very limited compared with neighbourhoods elsewhere in the same, wider space. So there are stark disparities in relation to that. And indeed, of course, those disparities exacerbated in England by library closures, by the cost and quality of the text available. All these things make a difference. And there are consequences, therefore, for us as working in education in schools. And then turning to book ownership, which is absolutely critical to all of this, Lindsay's work shows that there's a relationship between ownership and attainment. Those who have access to print are implicitly and often explicitly being encouraged to develop that habit that Kate was referring to. They're being encouraged to want to read, to desire to read. But of course, it's not just the number of books, although they are a predictor of reading achievement. It's also how the presence of those books build expectations and a preparedness to engage, to think through the narrative that's being discussed or shared. In Evans's work, for example, over 70,000 family cases were examined, and they showed very clearly that the number of books matter. And so we need to find in schools ways to get those books into homes and to begin to share the pleasure in reading, informed discussions and children choosing the text that they're engaging. So it's not about one book, it's about multiple books, and in homes where there are less print resource, then even the presence of one additional book is making a difference. So, quick summary, two-way traffic makes a difference. Parents' practices and understandings vary, and that shared reading and reading aloud both matter but decline with age, as do text ownership. Text access and ownership are hugely significant. There's much more we can learn from research, but that's a moment now. And then I'm handing over to Jamie, who's going to talk about building those communities of readers in home.
Thank you, Teresa. And just like Teresa said, delighted to be here today. So I'm going to now consider the ways in which in school we can, if you like, bridge that gap almost and build that reading for pleasure community. So building on what Teresa was saying about the current research that's out there, if we take this example of research by Imran Siraj around social class and educational inequality, what she found from that research is that children who succeed against the odds are those with those reading rich experiences. So perhaps if we spend a few moments just thinking about our own children, who are those children in our classrooms who have books in their home that are read to, that are taken to the library, and who are those that don't do that? Because these are the children that we need to concentrate our efforts on in school if that equality and attainment gap is to be closed. Effective intervention at this stage also involves thinking carefully about what we can do to make sure that these children are not missing out on those resources and expectations and experiences that lead to that success. If we take a look and build on the work of Margaret Clark's research around being school ready, and actually that idea that we as a school need to be ready for the child rather than the other way round. Often, schools will sort of say to a family, or make sure they can, zip up their coat, or they can, go to the toilet, etc. But actually, we need to make sure as a school community that we're ready for them as well, when we actually have a deep understanding, as the slide indicates, about our current family contexts and the home literacies that they currently have in school. And then we can build on that to create that family reading partnership, develop that reciprocity between school and home. And we can use that to support us in building that rich reading curriculum so that we can have consistent school reading routines, school reading and text experiences, which can then feed into that reading experience at home. So rather than us trying to impart what we need to do in school on home, we're allowing what they do at home to come into school. So we're sharing that good practice between the two. So modelling is a really key part of that, modelling reading aloud to parents. We've also already talked about 24-hour reads, but things like reading rivers, which are the same sort of concept, but having that collaboration around things like joint library visits, for example, being able to offer recommendations to families. Knowing the voice of your children to support them in the choice and in the choice of books and the types of texts they might be reading. Also think about ways in which you can perhaps have collaborative projects, things like bookmaking opportunities where children come into school and they can bring their parents along and engage in that kind of activity. Workshops and sharing sessions that are more than just one-off occurrences, but are part of that relationship that you have with your families. Also thinking about reading journals, Kate said at the beginning about the little chap who didn't want to engage in that kind of writing his record, but perhaps shift to how that perception of just using it to record, but actually use it as a way of them expressing the books they enjoyed, the books they didn't enjoy, and perhaps having that kind of dialogue and using it in that way to record different types of reading that they enjoy. Do they always choose fiction books? They always use picture books. They sometimes do they ever engage in poetry, non-fiction? So rather than it just being that record of the books they've read, but they could also be book reviews, book recommendations, that communication between home and school about we enjoyed this book for these reasons, we didn't enjoy this book for these reasons, and having that dialogue. Encouraging all that reading to go in here, not just the reading of the school book, but any type of reading that's gone on in school. But essentially, I guess what we need to be thinking about is what we know about our families, about our children's home literacies. What can they bring into the space, into the school space that we can then tap into and utilise to support our teaching? Then how can we use this to inform our practice and our provision? And what we can do to support our parents in making those kind of connections. So just a few moments for you to consider that for yourselves, really, in your own settings. And if you've got any thoughts, do pop those into the chat. But think carefully now about how your parents currently engage with reading at home, so you know what kind of situation you're currently in, and the ways in which how big the issue is, if you like it, in ways in which you'll know how to address that. So what ways do parents read with children at home? Is it just reading the school book, or do they read in other ways that perhaps we're not capturing at the moment? And like Teresa said, what perceptions do parents have about reading at home? And do they perceive that as being different to the reading that goes on in school? And actually, how can we support parents to be able to realise that perhaps reading isn't as onerous as perhaps it can be perceived, or how they may be perceiving it at the moment? And then just really to share good practice amongst each other. Ways that you currently encourage your parents to read with their children. So, like I say, do pop ideas in there, and others can share that with you. Whilst you're doing that, perhaps also consider: do we currently know enough about our children and our families? So thinking about that school readiness and us being ready as a school to bring those children in, and the earlier the better, as Teresa said. You know, when they're young, when they're first engaging in those kinds of literary acts, do we encourage and engage in children's home languages? How proficient are they in those languages? Perhaps even engaged in rhyme and song, and which songs are being sung at home, and how we might be able to bring that into the classroom. We have here at the CLP, we've had projects where we've gone into homes or And we've recorded sort of home lullabies and home songs in the home languages, and then looked at ways in which they can be brought into the classroom, and how that can actually support children's self-regulation as well as their reading, because it gives them the opportunity to feel settled because they have that connection with home. And then think about that print that children are most used to seeing in their home environment, and there are ways in which we can perhaps bring that into our classroom so they can see that we're working in partnership, and actually what's happening at home can we support them in school. And what models of literacy have they got around them? Have they got parents that read at home? Have they got older siblings or an extended family that we can perhaps tap into? And then think about once you've established, I guess, at what stage you're at with your parents and the relationships that you have, how we can then build on that and how we can establish that strong reading partnership with our community so that it feeds into both what we're doing in school and what we're doing at home, and look for that overlap in children's reading experiences, those opportunities where we can work collaboratively. Things like I said, going to the library, for example, and perhaps bringing parents along in that space. And again, rather than it just being us that's sort of coming to you with all of these ideas, perhaps you've got ideas that you can share in the chat, which others can pick up on and use. But what's important to note is that these things need to be more than just an event or an occasion. It needs to be something that's deeply embedded in a culture across the school. We don't want silver bullets. We want things that are going to last and they're going to really embed that at home. And I think it starts with building those relationships with parents, and getting to know their experiences and celebrating those experiences in the classroom to support them with their reading. One way in which that can be done, and Kate will talk a bit later on about a resource which has been compiled, but one element of that is some resources that us at the CLP have developed. They were originally developed as a lockdown project when schools were and families were in lockdown, and they were devised to support schools to share with parents to allow children to develop their own responses initially to texts that they may have studied or will be studying in school. And within those sort of teaching notes, if you like, there's sort of 5 key principles to support children and parents to be able to engage in that literacy more beyond just reading the book and perhaps engaging in a few questions, but to delve more deeply into that. So by exploring the text, perhaps by illustrating the text to show their understanding in a slightly different way, to talk about that, to imagine how they might feel if they were a character in a story, for example, and then to go on to create something for themselves to support that reading and that writing working together. Children don't have to have a copy of the book to be able to engage in that, because the resources themselves have sort of extracts from that. But what it could do is inspire parents to want to perhaps go and buy the book or go and visit the library and take the book out. And if their child enjoyed that extract, then that might support them in some way in engaging with that and showing what they're doing in school and how actually what they can do at home to support that. And again, that reciprocal relationship. So that concludes sort of my section of the webinar, and I'm now going to hand you over to Lucy from the National Literacy Trust, who oversees their school libraries work. Lucy.
Hello. The National Literacy Trust is in the second year of the Chase Rewarding Futures School Libraries programme, and through the programme we've been providing schools with training and resources to help support them to develop their school libraries with a particular focus on parental engagement. And we've been lucky enough to work with 4 Nottingham City primary schools from the Genogly Learning Trust, which has 8 schools across the Learning Trust in Derbyshire and Nottingham. So for the next part of this session, my colleague Vicky from the National Literacy Trust is going to talk to Alison from Genogly Trust to talk about the ways that they've developed very specific and tailored approaches to parental engagement across those different range of schools.
Hi Alison.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today. So as we heard from Lucy, you have a range of schools in your multi-academy trust. Can you tell us a little bit about the different contexts of those settings?
Yes, the one thing that all our schools do have in common is they're all from areas of high social deprivation, even though the communities are incredibly diverse. So we've got I've got a very small school with 63 enrolled, up to 400 in our largest primary and 1,200 in our secondary. All our disadvantage is from 33% to 66%, which is well above national average. And some of our context about parental engagement is we have many families that are new to England as well as new to English. They can't read written English well, even if they can speak it well. There's low literacy levels in many of our schools amongst the parents. There's a uniformity of lack of books in the home. And when we send books home, they often don't come back. So it's the value put on books in the home as well. And many school families struggle with broadband and Wi-Fi access. They might have phones, but they don't necessarily have laptops and tablets. And they tend to do it through their phone provider rather than through broadband because they just can't afford it.
It's a really wide range of context that you're working within. How did you go about setting priorities then for parental engagement when it came to reading for pleasure in those settings?
Well, we wanted to really look at the reading culture as a whole, both within the school and within the wider community. And it was just one part of the trust-wide development work on reading. And we started with reading audits. We looked at the significant developments of phonics so we could actually improve the reading per se, decoding and fluency. We looked at learning to read, so what we were teaching. We looked at the teaching of reading in all its settings from all the way through school. And a big thing was reading for pleasure. And we've worked with, done a lot of the work through the European University and the National Literacy Trust and looked at the CLP stuff as well. So we've actioned a lot of what you've heard about already. Parental engagement was, of course, part of that. And it was part of the much bigger picture. And we felt that it needed to be a little and often, rather than a one thing, big things periodically. It needed to be little, regular things that we could do weekly and half-termly to keep that going. And it needed to be sustainable and manageable for staff and for children and for families as well over a long period of time. The Reading for Pleasure was a really big part of that drive. That we started with a book audit. Some of our schools are very old, they're Victorian buildings, and some of the books did feel as though they were from when the school was built. So we had a massive reading audit across the schools, because actually what the important thing was to get quality texts in the home, because there weren't quality texts in the home. Sometimes there weren't texts at all in the home. And we wanted to make sure that we got that diversity of text and quality of text and range of texts as well. So from poetry, graphic novels, picture books for all ages, they're not just for young children, and some classic fiction, modern fiction, all of those things. And we wanted that to be in the home. We know that sometimes it won't come back, but it needs to be in the home. What we did do as well was make sure that our reading offer to our families and to our children reflected the communities and that we served, a windows and mirrors effect, if you like, when we were choosing the books for our schools.
Windows and mirrors, can you tell us a bit more about that and what it means and how you use that as a framework?
Well, both of those are equally important. We use the mirrors is what we say is the term that we use to reflect the communities that we're serving. So we wanted children and families to be represented in the materials that we got, and that's where we've actually put in most of the gap filling needed to be in that idea of the mirrors. And then the windows was equally important, because some of our schools are not ethnically diverse at all, and we wanted to make sure that they had a window to the world as well, because some of those communities are quite close communities. They don't often go out of their postcode into the wider world, and they needed to get that balance of reflecting the community, the mirrors and the windows, of seeing the opportunities, that aspiration, wanting more, seeing what the world had to offer.
So really what you're saying then is it's all about high quality books and diversity and representation. That's quite a tall ask. How did you go about doing that practically, in terms of, we know teachers are time poor, they've got lots on their plates. How did you go about sourcing all of that?
Well, a lot of it came down to school leaders as well. School leaders saw it as important. As a trust, we think it's vitally important. We have lower rates of literacy anyway. So we needed staff buy-in. So we had SLT buy-in, we had staff buy-in, we had children buy-in. And actually the staff were fantastic, and they were massively engaged, and they went and did some homework, and they looked on things like, we've got a really good education library service in Nottingham City that our Derbyshire schools can access as well. So they were a great source, because you don't have to buy anything, you can just go and look and then borrow it. We looked at people like Scott Evans, the reader teacher. We looked at the Pye Corbett reading scales. We looked at the core books on CLPE. We did the We looked on social media, which is great. If you kind of just follow those, and that's the Literacy Trust, follow these organisations, you get to find out who are the reader teachers around the country. John Biddle, for example, I know he's done a bit of work with the Open University too. And then we ran staff meetings and staff training, and where the engagement has been better with staff, it's where they've got involved and they've done it. So we've done it with them rather than done it to them. So each of the reading spines are bespoke to the communities that they serve. They're not the same across the trust.
That's great. So it's really ensuring that it's a priority for the school, that it's coming from senior leadership as well, but also it's tapping into those communities, those resources that we all have access to, and finding time to
because who knows the children better? It's the teachers and staff at the school in collaboration with the parents and the communities, much better than people from different parts of the trust.
So once you found out about you did all this research to identify the priorities in the settings, how did you then go about it? What actions did you take? Have you got some ideas that you can perhaps share with the teachers listening today?
Yes, what we wanted was we wanted the parental engagement to be a focus throughout the year, not just for World Book Day, but though the World Book Day is an absolutely brilliant launch pad for starting some of these things off and keeping them going throughout the year. Our intent was to have parents regularly connecting with school, both remotely through digital things like Boom Reader, which is a digital reading record, Red TED, which is Read Every Day, Talk Every Day with some of our schools, and through regular engagement in sessions with school. We wanted them to see parents to see reading as a pleasure, not just a chore, not just you've got to hear your children read and tick it off in their reading record, but actually just have that real pleasure, and by giving them quality texts to send home and to share with their children. We made that just built into intrinsic to what we do.
So it's going back to what Teresa was talking about earlier, and how parents are viewing reading in the home, and it's giving that permission that it's okay to just sit down and enjoy a book together. It doesn't have to be about that reading instruction all the time.
Exactly. It's not just about learning to read. It's about reading for pleasure. It's absolutely massive, and it's that lifelong skill. And then you get that conversation. So it's about that book talk. We felt was really important, because some of the oracy is fundamental to getting those children reading as well, particularly in the very young. We wanted it to be easy, and we wanted to entice them into engaging things in both school and with their children's reading as well. You know, one thing leads to another.
So the practical ideas you've got.
Oh, there's a lot of practical ideas, and I have to say that anything that I mentioned hasn't been done in one school. They've been done across our schools. They are an amalgamation, and you've heard many of the ideas already this afternoon that we've done in one place or another around the trust. One of the key things was choice. We want children to have choice about what they read. We want them to be able to take books home with them, so that they go into the home and parents can see how pleasurable reading can be. And we want it to be fun. So not just for education, it's got to be fun as well, reading for pleasure. So we wanted, so here are some of the ideas that we did. We made the purpose of the book sent home really clear to parents. We made it really clear which ones are the reading for pleasure books, and which are the ones that we're wanting them to secure their fluent reading practices, like phonetically matched books, for example, and accessible texts. We have set up breakfast reading clubs for children with parents, and anything that's got food and drink is always very handy to get parents in. We have stay and read, where they drop them off and then they stay and they read for a bit. Reading cafes. We've had a real push with the early years as well, because we want to embed those good reading practices really early on, and hope it feeds through. It's fine for parents to bring their younger children, their preschool age children, and bring them in, particularly to the early years environments as well, get some used to school and things as well. Story times. We have story times where parents come in and the reading is modelled by the teacher, because we actually want them, because overtly, we're not saying, come in and we're going to teach you how to read to your children. By just having them in and it being very, very informal, we're modelling best practice. And this is how you can read to your children. This is the kind of things we're reading with prosody. We're talking about the pictures. We're talking about the text. We're asking questions, and we're modelling that covertly.
Would you say that through the more informal opportunities for parents to come in, so through your reading clubs, your cafes, has the engagement been higher compared to perhaps more formal meetings?
Yeah, it's been much higher. When we've done things that about a formal meeting, come at 6 o'clock, and we're going to talk to you about this or do this with you. The engagement has been there, but it's been quite low. And by having the informal, regular, weekly, bi-weekly sessions where parents can just come in and things they can dip into as and when they choose. You don't hit every parent, you don't hit some of the parents that sometimes you really want to hit, but by word of mouth and parental WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups and things like that, making it clear that it's a fun activity and it's relaxed and it's engaging and parents can talk to each other, because that's after the pandemic as well, that's been massively important. A lot of parents have been quite isolated. It's that idea of community. We want the school to be a hub of the community, and reading and books is a great way to do that.
I've got to ask, how does the school library play a part?
Well, we've done it. Not all our schools have got space for a library because of the constraints of the building, but they have all got designated reading areas, whether it's in the entrance hall or whether it's some of our schools have got fantastic standalone libraries. But what we do is we try and have other parental events in there that are maybe nothing to do with reading in the school library. So it becomes this, and then again, it's that covert. These are some great books. You know, we've got the forward facing range of books, beautifully displayed, nice displays that celebrate reading, lots of things for people to look at. Just by hosting events in there, it's a bit surreptitious, it's by stealth. And getting them in there for other reasons, and that's actually what we want. We want to get parents in and we want them to see what we've got and things like that. We have parent helpers coming along on regular visits. We're quite lucky because we're quite urban. Many of our schools are within walking distance of libraries, so we can get parents in, because the library visits aren't really just for the kids, they're for the parents as well, and that way it becomes more about the community, and they might take their other children or take friends along, and we promote the Read Nottingham, do a lot of stuff in the local libraries as well, which is a great organisation that works with National Literacy Trust, which is great.
I was interested earlier when Teresa was giving the overview of the research, we heard about how reading aloud is declining as children grow up and age. And you talked about how there's lots of modelling opportunities for storytelling and how that's a key focus of your early years. But does that happen also in Key Stage 2? It
does. We build in some reading fluency practice, which is the oral reading in part of our reading teaching. However, one of the things that pupils have really enjoyed doing is videoing themselves, and it kind of started in lockdown when we were doing all that online learning and uploading stuff to Seesaw and things like that. But pupils videoing themselves because they can rehearse it and they can go over it and practice it and get it right, and then they can upload it. And some children do it with camera on, some children do it with camera off. But what this does with the parents is that often the parents holding the camera or hearing them practice and working with them, and it engages parents in the process, even if they are the videographer.
Fantastic. Are there any other ideas that you?
Well, because we have quite a lot of EAL and multilingual, certainly in our real inner city Nottingham schools, we try to, and one of the things we identified was that parents can't necessarily read English, even though they can speak it, is having some dual language books available. And that's something that we need to continue to work on to try and source some of those. We can't do every language. And again, the Education Library Service is good for providing those. So dual language books are really important so they can still enjoy that reading for pleasure, even if they can't understand it. We're looking to develop some more audio books. We've got some Yotos that we did through the Chase project with Lucy in school, and they're really good fun to have in. They're really good. And we've had a real focus on the nursery and reception in early years so that we can, with that storytelling rhyme song, which I know some of my colleagues have mentioned already this evening.
It sounds like there is lots going on.
It's very busy.
All the settings. That's fantastic. How do you go about measuring the impact and identifying next steps?
It is tricky with reading for pleasure because it's not necessarily data driven. And it is early days. We're only in the second full year really of the project, and it is still on our trust development plan as reading for pleasure being a priority. Our biggest challenge with the pupil engagement with books is, since we've had new books and about getting them represented and getting the quality text frames that become the norm, that's been the impact. And it's about parental feedback, parents commenting and just coming up those informal conversations at the gate, at the school drop off and school pick up. And just they end up starting to talk about books. Oh, my child really liked it when they saw themselves represented like this. Or, oh, we could make a link or a connection with some of the material that you sent home. Or, I really enjoyed that book. That was great. Have you got any more? Parental surveys, we've done surveys for children, staff and parents. So we're looking to feedback on that and do more with that. Parental involvement is on the rise in all schools. That's a way of measuring it. It's a bit of a slow drip feed, but the more we do it, the more engagement that we get, and that word of mouth, it's very, very powerful. And parents bringing other parents along, bringing their friend along, bringing new parents into the school and things like that.
When you say it's a drip feed, but earlier you talked about the fact that you wanted to ensure that everything you put into place was sustainable.
Yeah.
And it's a long-term impact. It's not just quick one-off moments.
Many of those things, like the reading cafes and the stay and read and the breakfast reading clubs and things like that, they're timetabled. So they're allocated. We've got an allocated space. We've got allocated staff for it. Sometimes it's senior leaders, sometimes it's TA, sometimes it's dedicated, the reading for pleasure lead. We vary up a little bit, and so it's shared, but it's seen as every teacher. Safeguarding is everybody's concern. Reading is everybody's concern. Every person in school is a teacher of reading and needs to promote reading. And that's what we're trying and working our way towards, that actually happens in reality.
Fantastic. So what do you think, what are the next steps for you and your trust?
It's still is maintaining it now and keeping it going and keeping that and that comes down to staff knowledge of children's reading practices and staff knowledge of children's reading text and staying current and seeing the new things out there. I've taken loads of photographs in the CLP library today to take back and put on the book lists and things like that. So and regular reviewing, how's it going? What can we do better? What's working well? Sharing ideas at network meetings about what's working well in the different schools, because they are socially diverse, but they do have many things in common, as we said. We want to develop the audio books and the audio reading and the dual language books in our city schools, in Nottingham City schools. And basically, we just want to use the moment for World Book Day to kind of promote that pleasure and choice of reading, to really embed what we're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alison. I'm sure there are lots of ideas that you have given our audience today. We'll hand back to Kate now, who's going to wrap up the session.
Thank you very much. I expect you were all scribbling furiously as that was going on. Alison, what a huge amount of ideas for everyone. So I'm going to finish off just by turning off our camera, because none of us are technically able enough to zoom the camera around at this point, just to chat about the resource that's going to be available to download from the World Book Day website. But I think colleagues will be sharing it on their websites too once we've gone beyond today, and I'll pop it in the email when the recording's live as well. The resource is a collaborative resource between all of the organisations who presented to you today. It focuses on each of the 6 reading behaviours. So if you identify in your school that children are struggling to choose books, there's some ideas that might support that. If you're looking at them talking about books, or kind of working socially or making it fun with your family, so that they're divided into those things. The idea is that you're thinking really carefully about the needs of your setting. Alison described that things aren't happening across a trust, but instead they're happening in individual settings slightly differently, because then the teachers are looking specifically at the children in front of them. We would really encourage you to do that. Thinking about what success looks like. Again, as Alison mentioned, reading for pleasure isn't data driven. It's not a tick box thing. It's looking at some of those other indicators. So more parents coming along to things, or responding to messages on your Facebook pages or on your online portals, or whatever that is. We've tried to shape the resource so you're looking at things that are sustainable. So you might start them on a big event day like World Book Day, but it's really important that they don't just pop up for a day and then disappear. We show our children that we really mean something by keeping something going, rather than just talking about it once and then letting it go again. And whilst World Book Day is, of course, an extraordinary and wonderful celebration, making sure that reading for pleasure, it's a moment in which you can drive a catalyst, and it raises a national conversation about reading for pleasure. But those things can be sticky and can be drip fed throughout the rest of your school years as well. So we hope that resource is going to be very helpful for you. I think that's everything that we all wanted to say. So I'd like to extend an enormous thank you to the colleagues surrounding me in the room today. So from Centre for Literacy and Primary Education, you also really brilliantly hosted us today, the Open University and National Literacy Trust, and in particular to Alison, who came all the way down from Derby to have a chat to us today. We're really grateful. Thank you all for giving us your time. We know your time is precious. We do have just a few minutes to look at some questions, if we do have any in the chat, or if anyone wanted to fling their hands up now. But if we don't have any of those, then I'll let you all go. I think Jessica has popped the resource link in the chat. Is that right? Yep. So you should be able to grab that from the chat. Is there anything?
All of the questions have been responded to.
Great. In which case, I'll just invite you to enjoy your evenings and also World Book Day. All of our teaching resources are now online, so please do get involved with all of those. And please don't hesitate to get in touch if you do have any specific questions. Thank you very much, everyone.